Hello, I'm Nora the Leca Queen, and I'm good at one thing, growing plants in Leca clay bowls. For the past few years, I've turned my passion into an obsession, experimenting with over 300 plants and sharing my successes and failures with thousands online. I've shared my journey on Instagram, YouTube, and helped thousands of people transform their plant care routines. And today, I'm going to share everything I've learned, everything you need to know to succeed in growing your plants in Leca. But if you can't watch this video for the next 5 minutes without clicking off, I've got some news for you. You're probably not cut out for growing plants in Leca. But if you're here to learn, I promise you'll gain invaluable knowledge to transform your indoor plant care. Here's what we're covering in this video. What is Leca? Explaining what Leca is, what the benefits of using Leca are, and why it's an excellent alternative to soil. Getting started with Leca. How to prepare your Leca for first use. Rinsing, soaking to remove all that dust. Choosing the right plants. Researching your plants, emphasizing the importance of understanding plant needs. I'll show you thriving plants in Leca, showing you different types of plants that are doing well in Leca clay bowls. How to prepare your plant for growing in Leca, making sure that your plant is healthy and pest-free. The perfect Leca setup, choosing the right containers, net pots, and so on, setting up the water reservoir, ongoing Leca care, watering techniques, bottom watering versus top watering, nutrient management, nutrient schedules and monitoring, light and humidity, seasonal plant care tips, a little bit of troubleshooting and advanced care tips. Dealing with common problems, identifying and addressing issues like root rot and pest infestations, flushing your plants, propagating plants in Leca. We'll talk a little bit about the Leca community and why connecting with other Leca growers is beneficial. And finally, embracing the luck factor in plant care. By the end of this video, you'll have the tools you need to grow thriving plants in Leca. The traditional potting mix growers may not want you to succeed with growing plants in Leca, but I'm here to change that. I'll share tips that have taken me years to learn so you can avoid the mistakes I've made. You will never look at your plants the same way again. Now, you might be thinking, why should I use Leca? What's wrong with good old-fashioned soil or potting mix? Let's talk about why you should consider growing your plants in Leca and move away from traditional soil or potting mix. Number 1, no more watering guesswork. Say goodbye to the constant worry of over or under watering. Leca makes it virtually impossible to drown your plants or to have them go thirsty. You have control. Leca helps prevent overwatering and underwatering by providing a consistent moisture level because of the nutrient solution in the reservoir. No overwatering greatly reduces the risk of root rot, a common problem when plants are grown in soil or potting mix. Number 2, you'll have healthier roots. Leca promotes healthy root growth by providing excellent aeration. The oxygen-rich roots lead to faster growing and more resilient plants. Say goodbye to soil-loving pests like fungus gnats, soil mites, and other creepy crawlies. They hate Leca. You'll have a cleaner, healthier environment for your plants. And of course, it's easier to maintain. Leca is reusable and easy to clean. It doesn't compact over time like soil, ensuring a long-lasting, low-maintenance solution for your plants. One of the pluses is that you have a visibility of the root system. With Leca, you can see the root development more easily. This visibility helps you monitor the health of your plants and catch any issues early. Of course, Leca is eco-friendly. It's an environmentally friendly option. It's reusable, reduces waste, and helps you use water more efficiently. In this video, I will rewire your brain about how to grow your plants and how to grow your plants in Leca clay bowls, giving you the tools to succeed where others have struggled. So what is Leca? Leca is an acronym that stands for Lightweight Expanded Clay Aggregate. Leca is basically clay balls. When they're manufacturing Leca, they obtain clay from a clay pit, run this clay through a rotary kiln, rotate it at very high temperature, and you end up with the characteristic round balls that we call Leca clay balls. Now, there's different kinds of Leca depending on the mine from which the clay was taken. So you can have dark Leca, like this Leca over here, that looks a lot darker than the normal red balls that you'd been used to seeing. So that is just really because of the way that clay is. And you've got this kind of Leca. This Leca is round and it is a deep brown or red color, depending on your screen and how you're visualizing this. So the color of the Leca is entirely dependent on the clay. There's different shapes of Leca. You can have very round Leca. You can have more irregular shaped Leca. And some people prefer to have the irregular shape because they think that the roots attach better to the irregular shaped Leca, which in some cases they do. I don't know, that's a preference. And also there is a little bit more stability when you're using the irregular shaped Leca because it packs well into each other as opposed to using the round Leca. And of course, there's different sizes of Leca. You've got the micro Leca, you've got the bigger kind of Leca going all the way up to really big round balls of Leca clay balls. So it entirely depends on what you have available to you in terms of what you're using. Although it should be mentioned that when you're transferring a plant which has got smaller roots like peperomias, plants like that, using smaller type Leca, micro Leca, is generally a better way to go. It has fewer, smaller air pockets and retains more moisture than the larger ones. So those kinds of plants prefer that kind of setup. While I'm talking about the different kinds of Leca, I will talk about Ceramsite. Ceramsite is what is sometimes sold as mini Leca. It's colored Leca, which in most cases is not Leca as we know it. It's not expanded. It's not lightweight. These little balls are actually quite heavy and don't have the same kind of capillary action that normal Leca, like the one that I've just shown you over here, has. So what will tend to happen is if you grow your plant in that Ceramsite, which is not expanded, your plant is not going to do well because it won't be receiving the moisture from the reservoir that it would if it was growing in normal Leca, and invariably your plant is going to die. So what brand of Leca should you use? Well, there are numerous brands of Leca depending on where you live in the world. That will, of course, determine what you have access to. One thing I highly suggest you do is contact a hydroponics shop close to where you live, find out what they stock. Find out what brand people living around your area use, and probably that is one way I would go. Another way to figure out what's the best brand to use for you is to go on some Facebook groups. There are lots of Facebook groups. There are lots of places online where you can find communities of people who grow plants using Leca clay balls, and you can ask them what brands they use. And that's generally a good way to find out what's a brand that works for other people. Otherwise, there are lots and lots of sales of Leca on places like eBay, on Amazon, that really can be a little bit suspicious, and you really should be making sure that your Leca is good Leca before you start, because that is the basis of everything. If your Leca is terrible, your plants are probably not going to do well, and you will then say that growing your plants in Leca didn't work. So the first thing you need to do is get yourself some great Leca clay balls to use. One thing that's really important for people to understand when they're starting to grow their plants using Leca clay balls is Leca clay balls, unlike potting mix or soil, do not have any nutrition. So when you're growing your plants in Leca clay balls, you need to provide nutrition via nutrient solutions or fertilizers. And I'll talk a bit more about what kind of fertilizers you need to use when you're growing your plants in Leca a bit further on into the video. But this is something that's very, very important. You need to provide that nutrition for your plants that are living in Leca clay balls. Right, so you've identified a brand of Leca that is perfect for you, and it is in the bag, depending on what kind of bag you've got, 5 liter, 10 liter, 25 liters, whatever. You need to prepare your Leca. When you get your Leca straight out of the bag, it is going to be as dirty as. Depending on the brand of Leca, some brands of Leca tend to be cleaner than others, but generally the Leca is going to have a lot of clay dust on its surface. So the first thing you're going to need to do is rinse off your Leca. And that cleaning process, when you first put that first batch of Leca under that tap or in that water, it is going to be filthy. It is going to be really dirty. So the objective is to try and get that water that you're using to clean your leca running as clear as you can get it. You don't want all that dust actually living with your plant. It's actually really quite dirty and you don't know what is in that dust. So you want to get it off. So that is the first thing. Rinse your leca off as much as you can. Get that water running as clear as you can. The next part of the process of cleaning your leca clables tends to be a little bit controversial because not everybody subscribes to this method. This is where you soak your leca in water or nutrient solution. You can give it 1, 2, 3 soaks depending on how much time you've got and how precious the plants are that you're transitioning. That will determine all those things. But the soaking, what you're doing with the soaking is getting all those bits of clay or bits of crud that are within the leca clay balls to actually seep out of the leca clay balls and get them cleaner. I'll give you an example of this. I'll give you some evidence of how you can tell that there's actually a lot of deposits inside your leca. So when you get some clean water and check the reading of the total dissolved solids, and total dissolved solids are items that are dissolved in our water. Every water has got total dissolved solids in it unless it's distilled or highly purified water. So if you just get your water from the tap, you've got dissolved solids in there, and it's minerals or bacteria, all sorts of things. You measure that. So in my case in Melbourne, when I measure my tap water, it's about 33, right? So if I get leca that I've cleaned off, that is water's running clear, and I soak it in there for a few hours or for 24 hours. When I check the total dissolved solids reading of that water, it is raised by hundreds of units. And I've done a video where I show this experiment. You can click on the link above and it'll take you straight to it. That is telling me that I've got dissolved solids in my leca that have gone from my leca into my water. So can you imagine what this would have done if I hadn't soaked my leca and have that go into my plant? Who knows how that would have affected the health of my plant? So I like to err on the side of caution, and I soak my leca for not less than 24 hours, especially if I'm using that leca for the very first time. It's different if you've used that leca for another plant before and all you're doing is cleaning the leca. But if you're using that leca straight out of the bag, you really do want to soak that leca a few times before you use it for your plants, especially if you're using it for some really special plants that you love. Plants like this one, for example. If you've got your special Thai constellation that you're wanting to put in leca for the very first time, you probably want to soak that leca to make sure that it's a-okay for your precious plants. Another thing that you can do instead of just soaking your leca clay balls in water is you can actually soak your leca in nutrient solutions. So you can use solutions like CalMag, you can use solutions like rooting agent, something like Clonix clone solution, and that helps displace the solids that are within the leca with the solids that are in your nutrient solution that are useful for your plants. So that's something that you might want to think of doing if you've got a bit more time on your hands and you really want to get that leca as optimized as you possibly can. Let's talk about choosing the right plants when you're growing your plants in leca. If you are new to growing plants in leca, my advice to you is use a plant that you are not very precious about. Use something that you can live with if your transition doesn't go according to plan. That is the first thing I'm going to suggest to you. Do not use the plant that your grandmother left for you before she died. That is not advisable. You can transition that plant once you've got a bit more experience under your belt. So easy plants like pothos groups of plants, for example. So I've got this neon pothos over here. They work very well in leca clay balls, and they're cheap and easy to find. Lots of philodendrons do really well in leca clay balls. Monsteras, like that one, they do really well in leca clay balls. So plants that are generally happy-go-lucky, easy-going plants will generally be okay, especially when you're starting out in leca clay balls. But talking about plants as well, you really need to look at the plant that you're wanting to move from soil to leca. Look at the care that you need to provide for this plant. What kind of plant is it? Does it like to have a little water, or does it like to have a lot of water? Is it a plant that's like a cactus? Is it a plant that needs a lot of light? Is it a plant that needs a lot of humidity? Examine these things and figure out whether these are the conditions that you're actually able to provide in your environment. Because if you're not able to provide these conditions for your plant, even before you transition it to Leca, the chances are that that transition is not going to be a success, and that plant is not going to have a happy life in Leca. It's not going to thrive. And then, of course, you'll turn around and say that Leca did not work for you, but you didn't take into account all the other things that you needed to put in place for your plant. So it's really important to know what it is you need to provide for your plant before you even start thinking about moving it from soil to Leca. There are so many plants that can thrive in Leca clay bowls. All the plants that you see around me here are living in Leca clay bowls. I've got alocasias living in Leca clay bowls. I've got peperomias over here. They absolutely love it. This is my philodendron tortum that is a loving life in Leca clay bowls. I've shown you my monstera type constellation, my pothos. There are a myriad of plants that you can grow in Leca. Calatheas, peace lilies, just to name a few. So it's very possible to grow any plants that you love to grow in Leca clay bowls in Leca. The secret is to understand what the plant needs and to tailor your care, even though it's growing in Leca clay bowls, to its specific needs. If you do that, you will succeed. So you've got a plant and you're looking to transition it from soil to Leca. There are a few things that you need to do to prepare your plant. The first thing you need to do is, of course, research your plant and make sure you understand its needs. We've talked about that. You need to make sure that your plant is healthy. Does it look like a healthy specimen for you to transition? Because if your plant is already struggling, it's already on the struggle bus before you move it from soil to Leca, the chances are that that transition is not going to go well, because that plant is already got issues. And when you move it from soil to Leca, that's stressing it out even more. So the chances of that transition going well are slim to non-existent at best. Check and make sure that your plant does not have any pest infestations, because of course a plant that's got pests on it is already not doing very well. And when you do that transition, that plant is not as robust as it would be if it wasn't infested with those pests. So make sure you check whether your plant has got any pests, and if it does, sort all that out before you start doing your transition, because if you don't, it is only just going to lead to disaster. So you've prepared your plant, you've prepared your Leca, and you are now ready for the transition. What do we need to do? So the first thing you're going to do, obviously, is take your plant out of the soil. Now, this is something a lot of people struggle with as well, especially depending on the kind of plant that you've got. If your plant has got more delicate roots, then you really need to be careful about how you take your plant out of the soil. The method I use is true and tested for me. I'll take my plant out of the pot, take it outside, and use my hose. I'll start off initially with the shower setting of my hose and eventually get down to the jet setting, and that just gets rid of all that organic matter and soil, and I have nothing to worry about. That works really, really well. And I don't have to worry about wasting water or anything like that, because invariably I'm doing it over my lawn or some plants outside, and that water is used for other things. That works excellently. Other people actually soak their plants in a bucket in some water and leave that plant for a few minutes, for a few hours, and when they get back, all that organic matter and soil is loosened off and they just use their fingers to take it off. A few people use a little brush, soft brush like a toothbrush, just brush those roots and you're able to get all that soil and organic matter off. But I do have to mention that the point here is not to get your roots clinically clean. The point is not to get them as pristine as you can get them. No. The point is to get off as much of that organic matter off as possible. You're trying not to damage the roots here. If you damage the roots, the chances of your plants transitioning well go really, really low. So the point is to get off as much as you can and leave the rest there. So you don't have to worry about getting it really looking sparkling clean. As most as you can is what we're looking for here. The next step when you're transitioning your plant, there's two methods here. The first method is what I like to call the long method, and the next method is where you're transitioning your plant and putting it straight into leca after that washing off of the soil. So I'll start with the long method. So the long method, I like to call it the long method, is obviously I call it the long method because it takes a longer time before you can actually get your plant from soil into leca. And this method is really a gentle way of introducing the hydro way of life to your plants. It's a gentle way of getting it from living in soil to living in leca. And once you've taken your plant out of that pot and cleaned off the roots, you are putting that plant into either water or you're putting it in a nutrient solution that is great for rooting. I like to use Clonix Clone Solution for my rooting when I am doing the long method, but you don't have to use Clonix Clone Solution if it's not available for you. People use Rapid Start, any solution that you can find that will help your plant, feed the plant and help the rooting process, you can use that. But like I said, you can even use water for the long method. And what we're doing with the long method is we are gently trying to get those roots used to living in a hydro environment. So we're taking them out of the soil environment and getting them used to living in a hydro environment. What we're not doing, and this is usually a misconception that people get when we're talking about the long method, they think what we're doing is turning those roots into water roots. That's not what we're doing, because there's no such thing as water roots. There's no such thing as soil roots or water roots. There's only roots that are used to living in soil and roots that are used to living in a hydro environment or water. So what then happens when you're growing your plant, when you put your plant in the long method, is some of those roots are actually going to transition. They're going to start getting used to living in that water environment and they'll be happy and they'll continue. But in that process as well, the roots continue growing. So you might have new roots that grow, that come off those older soil roots, as it were. So you've got some lovely new roots that come from there, but you've also got some of the old roots that actually slough off and die. And that's where it's really important for you to replenish that water or that nutrient solution weekly or 2 weekly. And as you're getting rid of that water, you're getting rid of those roots that have died as well, but you're also refreshing the nutrient for those roots and you're giving it fresh oxygen. So the long method really is a gentle way. You take your plant out of the soil, you wash off the organic matter or the soil, you put it in your solution or your water, change that water solution every week or every 2 weeks to refresh the nutrient solution and the oxygen, and your plant is going to have roots that get used to living in the water environment, or its old roots are going to die off. But what that does is it gets your plant into a state where it gently, very ever so gently changes its living space, okay? Because plants are a little bit like people. They don't like change. You have to introduce change gradually, and that's what the long method does for you. So once your plant has been living in that solution for a few weeks, even a few months, then you'll see those new roots, or those roots, old roots, are stronger and they're not dying. It means they're happy to live in that environment. Then at that point is when you put your plants into the leca clay balls, and that plant is invariably going to thrive. So this is a method I like to use when I've got really, really special plants that I don't want to sort of lose in that transition process. So if you've got a very special Thai constellation, for example, a really, really special plant that you think might not survive the direct transition, that is the method you'll be using. The other method is changing your plant directly from soil. You wash the soil off the roots, and you put it straight into the leca clay balls. And by and large, the majority of my soil to leca transitions, I use the direct method. Most plants are quite happy to go straight from soil into that method. It works really, really well. I've done this for my bird of paradise, my fiddle leaf figs, my monsteras. Monsteras are very happy to go directly from soil to leca. Hoyas particularly love it. So this is a method that you can use. So you can use two methods, your plants will transition. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about reservoirs. So once you've put your plant into the Leca clay balls like that, you're going to need to put it in a reservoir. And this reservoir, you can see there, this is the reservoir that contains the nutrient solution that's going to feed your plants. Because remember, I talked about the fact that Leca clay balls do not have any nutrition. So we need to provide nutrients to our plants through this solution. So there's different ways in which you can put your plant into the cache pot, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But this is what is called the submerged method, and in here is my nutrient solution. But I'll double back a little bit here, and I'll talk about how you actually place your plants in the pot. So when you're potting up your plant in Leca clay balls, you're going to fill up your pot about a third of the way, right? And then you'll put your plant on top. And the reason we're filling that nursery pot a third of the way is we don't want those roots that are not used to living in a hydro environment to be exposed to the nutrients that are going to be in our cache pot. And so remember that third, right? So because we've put our plant a third of the way up, we're going to make sure that our nutrient solution is a third of the way or lower than that, because in that way we're ensuring that our roots are not in contact with that nutrient solution, not until they get used to living in that hydro environment where it's fine to leave them in that space. So yeah, that is how you pot your plant up. So it's really important to make sure that you have that gap. You've got that buffer of leca that's going to be in touch with the nutrient solution that does not have those initial roots, those roots that were in the soil in contact with the nutrient solution in the reservoir. Let's talk about Leca setups and Leca pots. So there's generally two ways in which you can set up your plant. You can use what is known as the submerged method. This is the submerged method where you've got your nursery pot, which contains your plant and your leca sitting directly in the cache pot, and this nursery pot is in direct contact with the nutrient solution that's in the cache pot. So you can see when I pick that up that it's in contact with that nutrient solution and it drips over there. So this is a submerged setup. And you can also have what is known as the wick setup. So this plant over here is in a wick setup. And you can see that in the wick setup, you've got the use of a wick. That is a wick over there. What happens in the wick setup is this nursery pot, which contains your plant and your leca, is not in direct contact with the nutrient solution that's inside that cache pot. Only the wick is in contact with that nutrient solution. Different people have got different preferences. Some people prefer the wick setup, other people prefer the submerged setup. You notice that for a lot of my plants, I use the submerged setup only because it's easier for me to do that, because I don't need to find an outer pot for my pot where it's going to be suspended. Whereas when you're using the submerged setup, you need to make sure that your inside pot or your nursery pot is actually suspended from the top of that cache pot. And that can be a bit difficult to find. So I generally don't do that. But one of the most important differences between the submerged setup and the wick setup is generally, the submerged setup tends to be a lot wetter than the wick setup. So because this leca in this wick setup is really entirely dependent on that little wick, so that wick will bring up the nutrient solution to the leca that's around the little wick, and that via capillary action goes to the rest of the plant. So it does tend to be a little bit drier. Whereas this, you can imagine, you've literally got, depending on the depth of your reservoir, you can have nutrient solution all the way up to there. So this system just tends to be a lot wetter than the wick system. Now, this becomes really important, especially when you're trying to choose a setup for a specific plant. So for example, when I've got plants like cacti, I'm probably going to use a wick setup because those are plants that don't like wet feet. They don't like to be consistently moist. So using a wick setup in that case is good because it's a lot drier. So when you're transitioning your plants or thinking about pot setups, it's good to think about the kind of plant that you're dealing with and what kind of environment your plant prefers. Because if you put your cactus, for example, or your ZZ plant in a submerged setup with a very deep reservoir, then that plant is probably not going to be happy and it's going to end up with root rot. And then you will say that I killed my plant because I was using Leca. Not the case. You needed to understand what are the needs of your plants and how you can modify your setup to make that acceptable. So for example, when I'm growing my ZZ plants, I don't think I've got any of my ZZ plants in a wick setup. I've got all my ZZ plants in a submerged setup. But instead of having a very deep reservoir, I've got a very shallow reservoir. It's pretty much a dish. And what that allows me to do is make sure that the amount of nutrient in there is very little, just a little, because that's all that plant needs. I don't want it to be wet. So just thinking about things like that is what's going to help you succeed when you're growing your plants in Leca. Just, think about things just a little bit carefully and you will definitely be heading in the right direction. Let's talk about pots. What kind of pots do you use? What kind of pots should you use? What kind of pots can you use when you're growing your plants in Leca? The choice of pots is as deep as the ocean and is entirely dependent on the breadth of your imagination. You can have DIY options. You can have more expensive options. It is entirely up to you. So I like to use my DIY options for the majority of my plants. And that's just because I have so many plants. And my DIY option is this. This is just a nursery pot that is used for any other plant. And all I do is put holes in those pots. And by doing that, I create what is called a net pot. So you can get net pots that are specifically for semi-hydro plants. Lots of semi-hydroponics shops have them, or semi-hydroponics websites, you can get them. But I like to use the DIY option. Just use what you have. So pots that your plants come in when you buy them from the nursery. Just make holes in them and voila, you've got a DIY net pot over there. And you can also have simple cash pots. This is a pot liner and I put this black tape around it. I put the black tape around my pot liner because I don't want my plants to develop algae. So when you've got plants that are living in semi-hydroponics, this nutrient solution in here is nutrient rich. It's food, right? So algae is all around us. It's everywhere. You can't get rid of algae. Algae will seed in that nutrient solution, and given the right conditions, which is light, food, water, the algae will start to bloom and grow. So you'll end up with red, green looking yucky stuff all around your plant and all around your pot. So in order to stop the algae from growing, all you need to do is cover your pot or get an opaque cash pot like this. And by doing that, you don't have any algae. But okay, where was I? I was talking about the different kinds of pots. So one of the pots that I use is this one. This is a little cute pot. It's a naked rooted planter and it's 2 pots in one. So you've got the inner pot that's got all those slits that allows for the air to go through those roots, which is the reason why I make the holes in my net pot when I'm doing my DIY net pot. And it's got the little cash pot over there and that acts as the reservoir. So that's one option. This is something that you would have to buy, obviously costs money. So if maybe you don't have as many plants as I do and you want your plants to really look gorgeous, something like that is an option. You also have things like this. So this is a self-watering planter. This is a lechuza pot. It's a lechuza mini deltini. I absolutely love this pot because I love lechuza pot. It looks amazing. It looks beautiful. It looks really nice in my home. I love the fact that it's got that little indicator over there. So it tells me what's happening in my reservoir. Do I have nutrient solution in my reservoir or not? And when it's depleting, that little indicator, the little red indicator goes down. So I know I need to fill that up. The thing I love about this mini deltini as well, though, is it's a wick system. So some lechuza pots do have a wick. others do not. So you just have to look at the pot that you're thinking about and see whether that's an option. But I love them. So for this particular pot, I actually put those little holes, ventilation holes in that pot myself, because I'm of the camp that believes that ventilation holes really help with getting that air to my roots, and in so doing, preventing root rot. Not everybody believes that, but I believe that, and I truly believe that it's one of the reasons why I've had a lot of success growing my plants in Leca clay bowls. So that's another option that you can use. I've also got these little pots. These are little pots from the Leafy brand, and they also have an inside pot and an outside pot. Now these pots actually don't come with these ventilation holes. I put those ventilation holes, and I put this little wick on there so that I could make this wick setup. I absolutely love them. I love these as well because they're clear, and because they're clear, I can actually see what's going on with my roots. You'll find that I love to use clear pots when I'm growing my plants in Leca clay bowls. Let me see if this isn't going back in. Hang on, there we go. I love to use clear pots. You don't have to use clear pots, and I don't have clear pots for all my plants. But what clear pots allow me to do is take a look at my roots. I can see what's going on here. And there's a lot to be said for looking at roots. There's just a whole group of people that just love looking at roots. I happen to be one of them. But apart from just looking at them because they make you feel good, you can see what's happening with the health of those roots. And if there's root rot that's setting in, it's very easy to catch it early and deal with it as quickly as you can before it actually kills your plant completely. So that's the thing I love about clear pots. But I should state that clear pots are not necessary. You can use any color pot that you like, because you can see this isn't a clear pot. I'm using that. So there are quite a number of pots that I have that aren't clear. So clear pots are an option. So there's a multitude of pots that you can use for semi-hydroponics. So just be creative, think outside the box, and just, the world is your oyster. I'll give you a little tip here when looking for cash pots, cash pots like this. So this is one plant where I've got this plant in a DIY net pot, right? But I've got this cash pot. What I do when I'm walking around the shops, when I know I'm going shopping, I'll usually bring along my little nursery pots, just empty ones, like this one and my 14 centimeter one. The pots I use more commonly, 10 centimeters and 14 centimeters. I'll bring them with me. I'll have them in my bag. And when I'm just browsing and I come across a ceramic pot that doesn't have a hole in it, and those are really hard to find. If it doesn't have a hole in it and it's glazed on the inside so that water can actually contain a nutrient solution of water, I'll take my little pot, I'll put it in there and see whether it fits. And if it fits, then I'm probably going to buy that pot and use it as a cash pot. So that's a little tip. That's something you can do, and that'll add to your cash pot store, and you can have your pots looking as lovely as you want to have them look. So yeah, try it. Let's talk about water. Water is the elephant in the room when you're growing your plants in Leca. The quality of the water that you're using to mix up your nutrient solution is very, very important. One thing I'd advise you to do before you start growing your plants in Leca clay bowls is to know the quality of your water. So you can call out your local water company or whoever supplies your water, or have your water tested. And just to have a rough idea of what is coming out of your tap if you are going to be using tap water, whether the total dissolved solids, what's the pH of your water, what are the minerals in there, what's the level of calcium, what's your chlorine, what's your chloramine levels. All these things do end up being important in the long run when you're mixing up your nutrient solutions. And that's also going to determine how your plants actually absorb that nutrient and able to grow well. So I'll give you an example of what I do for me. So we've got excellent water in Melbourne. Our water is absolutely fantastic. When I take my water out of the tap, the amount of total dissolved solids in there is about 33, which is so much lower than a lot of people around the world have. And the pH is exactly where I need it to be. So I use a foliage focus, which is my primary nutrient when for my plants that are growing in Leca. When I mix my foliage focus as is recommended, and this is only foliage focus, I check the pH of my nutrient solution. It lies between 5.5 and 6.5, exactly where I need it to be for most of my plants that are growing in Leca. It's fine. I don't need to do anything else, and I can use that to grow my plants, and it is good. Sometimes when I'm feeling a little bit frisky, there is the thing about chlorine and chloramine. You can leave your water out for 24 hours, put it under some UV rays, put it under the sun, and you'll have all that chlorine and chloramine dissipating, so your water is a lot better. Some people actually use rainwater. Other people use reverse osmosis water if the quality of the water coming out of your tap is not great. So reverse osmosis water, you can buy reverse osmosis water, or you can go to reverse osmosis water unit that you'd have under your sink or for your whole house. There's different ways in which you can get good water. So I highly recommend understanding the quality of the water that you've got coming out of your tap and what is the best way of getting that water to be in its optimal condition for your plants that are living in Leca. Of course, this isn't something that should scare you off growing your plants in Leca clay bowls, but it is something that's really, really important, and it's something important for you to keep in mind. And if you do want to do this long term, it's something I highly recommend you check out. Nutrients. Let's talk about nutrients that you use when you're growing your plants in Leca. So as we've stated already, when you're growing your plants in Leca, you must give your plants nutrients, because Leca does not have any nutrients. If you leave your plant in water, and people talk about, I grow my plants in hydro and I leave it in water and I don't put anything for months, I just cringe and I shake in my boots, because I'm thinking that is just wrong. Every living thing needs food to grow. Every living thing needs building blocks in order to make its food. And by you not providing the right conditions for your plants, the right nutrients for your plants, you are just killing that plant slowly. It might not die today. It might not die next week. It might not die in 6 months, but one day it is going to cock it, because everything needs food. Anyway, rant over. Everything needs food. And for plants that are growing in Leca or semi-hydroponics, you need a nutrient that has been specifically formulated for plants that are growing in hydroponics. What you are not doing is going to your local store, your local Bunnings, your local Lowe's, going and picking up any good old fertilizer off the shelf and using that for your plants in Leca. That is wrong. You might be lucky if that nutrient solution has been formulated for plants in hydroponics, but you might not. The nutrient solution needs to be formulated for plants in hydroponics. I'll tell you why. When you're growing your plants in soil or in potting mix, that soil or that potting mix has got bacteria, it's got fungi, it's got microbes, it's got it's a biome, it's got all sorts of living things in there. It's rich. Potting mix is a living thing. Those living things that are living in that potting mix will receive the fertilizer that you give them, and they will break that fertilizer down into components that the plant is then going to absorb and use in the process of photosynthesis to make food and grow. That's basically how that works, right? Now, when you've got a plant that's living in Leca clay bowls, which don't have any fungi or microbes or anything in that system, it doesn't have a microbiome that's set up to break down those nutrients, that fertilizer. What will then happen is that nutrient will just sit there and your plant is not able to absorb it, because it's in a state that the plant can't use. It's in a state that the plant can't absorb. It's not available. The nutrients need to be available to the plant in a form that's available to the plant. So nutrient solutions or fertilizers that have been made for plants that are growing in hydroponics are in a state that the plant can absorb. That's really, really important to realize. So what you are not doing is getting your fish emulsion that you've been using for your plants growing in soil, your sea soil, and putting that in your plant. that is not going to help your plant. And I'll tell you, your plant will probably be okay for the first few weeks. Not much will probably happen because plants have reserves and stores, but at some point, things are going to go pear-shaped and your plant is going to die. And then you'll say it's the leca that killed your plant. No, it's not the leca that killed your plant. It's the fact that you didn't provide your plant with food that it was able to take in. So it's really important to understand the type of nutrient that you need to give your plant. Now, if you're not sure about what nutrient you need to give your plant, this is where you again go back to people who are a little bit more knowledgeable. So, and sometimes if you go to your hydroponics shop, they might know. Go to groups of people that are growing their plants in semi-hydroponics or in Leca. They will probably steer you in the right direction. They will know what nutrients they use in that specific country. So for example, I use growth technology foliage focus. I'm in Australia. I know people in the UK, for example, people in other European countries can't get access to foliage focus. Not a lot of people in the United States get access to foliage focus, but there's other things to use out there. There's the Flora series, there's the Dynagrow Pro, there's all sorts of other nutrients that are formulated for plants that are growing in hydroponics that you can use. So all you need to do is just dig a little bit deeper and find out what those are. Another way you can know what's a good nutrient solution is by looking at the guaranteed analysis of that nutrient. That guaranteed analysis is what tells you what's actually in that nutrient. It tells you how much potassium there is, how much phosphorus, how much calcium, how much manganese, all these things. So you get to find out what are the macronutrients, what are the micronutrients, and you can tell whether this is good enough for your plant or not. Some plants need more phosphorus, some plants need more nitrogen. That guaranteed analysis is what's going to tell you what's in there. If a nutrient solution doesn't have a guaranteed analysis, I would be running for the hills, running away from that nutrient solution because it's probably not one you want to be using. Another reason why it's really important for you to know what the guaranteed analysis of a nutrient solution is if your nutrient solution has got certain gaps in that, maybe the amount of calcium in there is not as high as your plant requires, you're then able to supplement the calcium. So you might add to your nutrient solution some calcium. You might need to add some magnesium. You might need to add certain things that are not as available in your primary nutrient. So it's really helpful to know that guaranteed analysis. And that brings me on to additives. So primarily, you can probably get away with just using a single nutrient solution if you're just using a single one, or the 3-bottle one, or however your primary one is. But as you go along in the hobby, you might want to start thinking about other things that will enhance the growth of your plant. So for example, things like silica. You might add silica. Silica is great because it increases the strength in your cell walls of your plant. It makes your plant more robust. It's more able to resist disease. It just becomes a generally stronger plant. So you might think of doing that. Some people swear by silica for keeping their variegated plants nice and white. So if you've got a variegated plant like your Thai constellation, some people say if you use silica, that white bit there is going to stay nice and white and not going to go brown and manky. So you might want to do that. You might want to add CalMag because you don't have a lot of calcium in your primary nutrient solution. You might want to add things like beneficial bacteria, which end up being really good for your root system. And of course, we all know that if the root system of your plant is healthy and happy, then the leaves and the rest of your plant is going to be happy as well. So there's all these things that you can add to your nutrient solution as you go along, as you become more confident in growing plants in Leca, that will enhance your plants even more than what they can be. Because what growing your plants in Leca will do is it allows you to optimize, and optimize is the word. You can just fine tune right down to the micronutrient what your plant needs, give it that, and things just absolutely explode. I should mention that if you are going to start looking at adding things to your nutrient solution, so if you're going to look at adding silica, if you're looking at adding calcium, beneficial bacteria, and all those kinds of things, there's certain ways in which you need to mix these things. There's an order in which they need to be mixed in, because if you add your nutrient solution before you add your silica at a different point, you might end up having what is called a nutrient lockout, and that nutrient actually ends up not being available for your plants, despite the fact that you've provided it, but you've mixed it wrong. And because you've mixed it wrong, there's certain chemical reactions that have taken place in those solutions that'll maybe make the calcium not available or make the potassium not available. So you want to make sure you're doing it right, and you want to make sure that you've got the pH at the right level for your specific plant. So that's a bit more than the 101 course that we're doing today. That's something we can discuss at a later date, or there's lots of information out there about how you need to mix your nutrients, but that is something that you need to be aware of. Okay, now that we've got water quality and nutrients out of the way, let's talk about watering. Let's talk about how you're actually going to maintain the reservoir of your plant that's living in Leca. So how do you actually get the nutrient solution? How do you actually get the nutrient solution in that reservoir? Some people water from the top, some people water from the bottom or from the side. In my practice, I don't think it really matters whether you're watering from the top or whether you're watering from the side. Sometimes you might find that it's actually not easy for you to access the side of your pot. It's okay to water from the top. The plant will be happy. It's not going to kick up a fuss. So, for example, I've got my Ceramsite living in my lechuza pot over here. When I see that my indicator has gone down, I just water that from the top and I watch that bob up to the top, and that's how I do it. For my other plants, I water from the side. It doesn't really matter. As far as my practice goes, I haven't noticed any difference. So yeah, have at it. Water in the way that works best for you and your plants. But it's really important for you to understand that depending on the age of your plant and how long it's been living in Leca, you want to make sure that you're keeping that reservoir at the level that you need to keep it at. So if your plant is new to Leca and still doesn't have those roots going down to the bottom, you want to make sure that that reservoir is slightly lower, less than that third where those roots are, so slightly lower. But if your plant has been living in Leca for a while, like this one, you can be a bit more liberal with how you top up your reservoir. I'll give you an example of my spider plants. My spider plant is a very thirsty plant. It drinks like crazy. So I tend to actually fill the reservoir all the way up to the top. And the reason I do that is I know that within the next 2 days, all that nutrient solution will be gone because that plant is just thirsty. Now, I would not do that for a plant like an alocasia, because I know that alocasias do not like to have wet feet. They don't like to have their roots wet. So I keep that reservoir a little bit lower than I would when I'm doing that with my spider plant. So it's again coming back to understanding what your plant needs, observing your plants as you're taking care of them. It's really the best way, because there are a lot of conditions that determine how quickly, for example, your reservoir runs dry. So depending on the growing season. So when your plants are really actively growing, like in the spring or in the summer, oh my goodness, you will find that you're filling up those reservoirs so many times, and depending on the temperature, if it's really hot as well, that plant is just going to drink up. But when you're not in the growing season, autumn, winter time, temperatures are low, there isn't a lot of sunlight, chances are that reservoir is not going to be filled up for weeks because that plant is not drinking as much as it would. So you're playing things by ear and you're seeing what's happening with the growth of your plant and how it's actually utilizing that reservoir. So it's a game that you and your plant will get to play. And as you understand each other better, you will know when and how frequently you need to change that reservoir. Let's also talk about exactly what you're doing with your reservoir. Are you topping up the reservoir, or are you chucking out the nutrient solution that's in your reservoir and putting fresh nutrient solution in there? This is a really interesting subject, which Yeah, it's very interesting. I'll tell you what I do and then I'll tell you what I advise. So I have like 2 million plants in my home. Obviously not 2 million. I don't have the luxury of treating every plant with kid gloves, and I have a very busy life outside of taking care of my plants. So most times I find that I am just topping up my plants. I'm topping up my reservoirs. What I'm not doing is going and cleaning them and putting fresh nutrient solution and getting rid of the old one. I'm just topping up, which in and of itself is not the best practice. But do my plants survive and are my plants thriving? Yes. Could my plants thrive better if I threw out the old nutrient solution and just put fresh ones? Probably. I don't know. I'll never know until I start doing that. But what do I advise you to do? I advise you to take your plant. If your nutrient solution has been in there for 2 weeks, I'll advise you to take that. Take this whole thing to the sink, throw this nutrient solution away. Or, if you've got other plants that are living in soil or, plants outside, throw that there. Throw that there so you're not wasting it. Maybe. I don't know. Throw that there. That's a lot of people do. Throw it in there. Wash out the reservoir, clean that out, because you'll find it's quite dirty. You've got the leca dust that always comes in. You'll never get rid of leca dust. It always comes, so don't worry about it. You've got the leca dust. It's a bit manky. And then if you might have some bits of roots in there. You might have some bits of flowers. For example, if you've got Hoyas and your Hoya's flowered, all those little flowers are going to drop into your reservoir depending on whether it's open or not. So throw that out, wash it out, clean it out, make sure it's nice and fresh. Put in some fresh nutrient solution. Your plant is going to love you for it because that nutrient solution has got everything that it needs. It's clean and it's got fresh oxygen in that nutrient solution as well. So it's great. This is what I recommend you do. This is what you must always do, people. If you can do it, do it. If you can't do it, it's not the end of the world. Your plants are not going to die. Plants are very resilient. Look at mine. It's not the end of the world, but I highly recommend that you do. While we're on the subject of watering and reservoirs, we'll talk about flushing. Flushing is something that people that grow their plants in Leca or in semi-hydroponics will come across time and time again. It's a very important thing that you need to do for your plants. So what is a flushing anyway? Flushing is when you take your plant, you take your little pot, you put it under some running water, and it just washes off your plant. Right? It washes off the leca, it washes off your plant, refreshes everything. Why is flushing important? I said it already. It will refresh your leca. So it's been sitting in that nutrient solution. It's been absorbing nutrient solution. Your plant absorbs what it needs, lives out what it doesn't. So you've got all sorts of weird things happening in there. That clean water will just wash everything away and make it clean. It's like you taking a shower. It feels so good when you've taken a shower, right? Same thing for your plant. What it also allows you to do is clean the leaves of your plant, especially when you've got little leaves like these. It's really difficult to sit down with your Hoya and clean every single leaf. But flushing allows you to just clean off the plant. So you're cleaning off the plant, you're cleaning off the leca. It's fantastic. And then at the same time, you're cleaning off your reservoir, you're putting fresh nutrient solution. What flushing also allows you to do is get rid of the efflorescence. The efflorescence is that white stuff that accumulates at the top of your leca. So if you've had your leca sitting in that nutrient solution for a while, you might get this white stuff, which is not mold. We're not talking about mold. We're talking about efflorescence. You can see that it's little powdery stuff. And when you flush your plant, all that just gets washed away. It's deposits that have accumulated from your nutrient solution, from your water. It could be calcium. It's just all sorts of deposits, and that just gets washed away and it refreshes your leca. So flushing is something that is highly recommended. How frequently do you need to flush? Look, it depends on how many plants you've got, how frisky you're feeling about the whole taking care of plants in leca process. People do it every fortnight. Some people do it every month. Can you get away with not flushing your plants for longer than that? Yes, you can. There are a lot of people I know who actually don't flush their plants at all. So it is possible to do. But then again, it really comes back to what is it? What kind of practice do you want to do for your plants? We know that it's good practice to flush, right? We know what the benefits of flushing are. So yeah, it's good to flush your plants. Whenever you can flush your plants, I highly recommend that you do. You're now an expert. You've moved your plant from soil to leca. It's living its best life in the leca clay balls. But how do you make sure that your plant actually thrives? Because leca is just a medium. It's just one thing. It's just the substrate that the plant grows in. You need to make sure your plant is getting the amount of light that it needs. Remember, circling back to researching your plant and what it needs to thrive, make sure you're giving your plant the light that it needs. So you've either put your plant in front of a lovely window where it's getting unobstructed, direct, bright, indirect sunlight, or whatever kind of sunlight that it needs. You've got it in front of a sheer curtain if that's what it needs. And if your home or the place where you've got your plant does not have the light that it needs, you've probably got a grow light on there to make sure that your plant gets that light that it needs. There's ways that you can make sure that the plant is getting the light that it needs. You need to make sure the plant is getting that light, because it doesn't matter how well you take care of your plant in leca. If it's not getting that light, it is never going to thrive. Same thing with humidity. A lot of the plants that we keep in our home are tropical plants, right? And a lot of plants that grow in the tropics, it's humid there. There's a lot of humidity. Sometimes it can get to 70, 80% humidity. Come to our homes, you've got 20% humidity. That plant is not going to thrive. So you want to make sure you're giving your plant the humidity that it needs. A simple way of doing that is grouping your plants together. So you can have your plants living in one spot in one room, and they'll create a little microclimate, and that allows that humidity to go up. You can also use a humidifier if you need to. But while we're on the subject of humidity is something that's really, really important, especially when you're just in those early stages of transitioning your plants from soil to leca. Humidity can be your ally. So when you're transitioning, especially plants that have got very, very thin roots, like peperomias, this kind of plant, for example, plants like, even some alocasias, honestly, plants that really you're thinking these leaves are, they just need a little bit more support. Giving your plant more humidity will help that transition. It will help support the roots. And a simple way of doing this is just putting a plastic bag around that plant. As you're doing that long method, or as you've just done the transition, put a plastic bag around your plant that'll raise the humidity around those leaves, support those leaves until the roots can kick in to give that moisture to that plant and keep the turgor in those cells, the turgor up, so that your roots, your leaves aren't limp, right? And you can even, after you've put it plant in the plastic bag, put that plant that's surrounded with the plastic bag in a propagation box, for example. So you've just really upping the humidity, or you can even use a cloaca to get that humidity up. There's so many things you can do to help your plants reach that humidity level that they need in order to help them survive. This is a little alocasia cutting that I got from an alocasia. This plant does not have any roots. All I did was put the cutting in some leca that was pre-soaking, and I put this humidity dome. I got this from, I think I got it from IKEA, and you can see there's actually moisture around that dome. So that plant has been well supported, and you can see those leaves are firm. They are really, really firm. So in as much as this plant doesn't have any roots just yet, the leaves are being supported by the humidity around there. And yeah, so humidity is something that you should not overlook. So something as simple as this is a way in which you can support your plants in the short term. Let's talk about some seasonal care tips. You know, we have seasons and things happen with our plants in various seasons. So I absolutely love spring. I love the growing season. I know every plant parent loves the growing season. We all know what we need to do in spring. No dramas. Our plants have got the maximum amount of light that they need. They're probably nice and humid. They're growing. It's all lovely. Come autumn, come winter, things start to take a turn. So when you're growing your plants in Leca clay bowls, one of the things you can do to help your plants along, because your plants aren't growing as much, is you can actually dilute your nutrient solution. So instead of giving them the full strength of the nutrient that you give, you can dilute it. So I use foliage focus for my plants at 5 mils per liter of water. So when it's not the growing season in the autumn or the winter, I'll maybe half that and give them 2.5 mils per liter, because I know my plants aren't growing as much, so they don't need as much nutrient. And one of the ways you can actually tell that your plants aren't growing as much and don't need as much nutrient is you start to see a lot of efflorescence. You start to see a lot of white fluff on your leca during the autumn and the winter months, because your plant isn't growing as much. It's not taking up that nutrient solution, but because evaporation is still happening, you get that nutrient or calcium and all the other things that are in your nutrient solution precipitating on top of your leca, and it manifests as that white powder or that efflorescence. So when I see that, I know that I need to reduce the amount of nutrient that I'm giving my plants. But depending on the plant as well, I know that I probably need to support my plants by giving them a lot more light. So that's when I'll either move them closer to the window. If they weren't closer to the window, remove those sheer curtains if I had the sheer curtains on during the summertime to protect them from the direct light. Or I might actually turn my grow lights on or have more grow lights on those particular plants if I want them to keep growing, especially for plants like alocasias that do have a dormancy during the winter time. You want to give them those conditions where you're keeping them warm, you're giving them the light, and chances are then they'll stay a little bit happy. Plants like oxalis plants that tend to just, sense that conditions aren't right, so I'm going to stop growing, drop all my leaves, and just be a bit of a drama queen. So you might want to think about doing things like that to help your plants through those seasons if you want to still have their company. But of course, when you're looking at the summer months, for example, it gets really, really hot. So you want to think about where you're placing your plants. Where is it? This is really in front of that window. Does it need to be there? But of course, bearing in mind that because it's very, very hot, your plants are taking up a lot of water and nutrients. So you need to be a bit more vigilant than you would be in the summer months or the winter months in terms of having those reservoirs run dry, because they do run dry. And especially if you're growing your plants using the wicking methods, it's very possible that your plants will actually end up getting dry rot because they're not getting water. So you can see this is a plant that doesn't have any nutrient in that cash pot. So that is something that can happen, especially in the summer months. So you really need to just be thinking about what are the processes that are happening in your plants and what do you need to do to help them along. Let's talk about common problems. Root rot. Root rot is a common problem that a lot of people experience when they're growing their plants in Leca, especially newbie Leca plant parents. And I find that usually root rot is because the reservoir has not been managed very well. The plant has not been given the conditions that it needs. So if you are putting your reservoir too high, for example, and your plant is just recently been transitioned to Leca, the chances of it getting root rot are very high. If you're not changing over your nutrient solution regularly, chances of root rot go up. If you're not providing the plant with the conditions that it needs, light, for example, the plant is not achieving optimal conditions, chances of root rot go up again. So you need to be thinking about all these things as you're taking care of your plant, making sure you're optimizing. And as you're optimizing, the chances of you getting things like root rot are lower. But if you do get root rot, certainly you need to take that plant out of that Leca. Grab yourself some hydrogen peroxide, 3% hydrogen peroxide, make a solution, whack your plant in that hydrogen solution for a few hours up until it stops bubbling. Get rid of all those roots that are rotted, and you might need to actually reroot the plant. So maybe you might need to do the long method for your plant, get that root system going, really support that plant. And when I say support that plant, I'm talking about upping the humidity if it needs it, making sure the plant is warm, making sure the plant has got the most amount of light that it can tolerate so that it starts to create more roots and is in a better position for when you put it back in those Leca clay bowls. So it's, again, these are things that as you grow your plant in Leca for a lot longer, you get a knack for these things, and you can actually tell whether a plant is getting root rot or not. Another important thing actually is yellowing of leaves. So when your plant starts to develop yellow leaves for no particular reason, and you're like, oh, what's going on here? Pick up the plant, look at the roots, give it a whiff. If things are looking a bit sus, you probably have root rot, and that's something you need to sort out. Pests. I would love to say that plants growing in Leca clay bowls don't get pests, but that is just not true. That is a serious misconception that people seem to have. What we end up not having are things like fungus gnats, soil mites, pests that are dependent on potting mix or soil. We generally don't have those, but things like thrips, things like spider mites, our plants are fair game. So those are things that you can get anytime. So again, things like this, vigilance. Vigilance is what you need. You need to be vigilant, monitoring your plants all the time. So when you're taking care of your plants, you're not just watering and walking off. You are spending time with your plant. You are looking at the leaves. Is there anything different? Are there any streaks on there? Grab yourself a magnifying glass or one of those jeweler typey thingies with a little light on there. Examine your leaves, front and back. Examine the stem. Make sure that everything is okay. And if you do see something, you are treating it immediately. You are isolating that plant, isolating the plants around it, inspecting them too, and treating that plant accordingly. So whether you've got spider mite, thrips, whatever, you put in all those protocols for how you're going to treat that plant. Whether you're using your systemics, you're using foliar treatment, just get in there and sort that out immediately. But talking about pests, it would be remiss of me to not talk about prevention, because ultimately prevention is better than cure. We want to make sure our plants don't get infestations. Of course they will, because everybody gets pests, right? But you want to be vigilant and try and stop things before they happen. So when you get a new plant, you are quarantining that new plant. My new plants quarantine in the garage before they even come into the house and see all its new friends. You have to prove that it doesn't have any pests. So you're inspecting that plant, you're treating that plant if it does have pests before you introduce it to the general populace. But one of the things that I really advocate for is, again, prevention, but by making sure that your leaves are clean. You have to clean your leaves. So flushing will help you clean your leaves. As you're getting that water on the leaves, that'll help you clean your leaves, which is excellent. But also just literally manually cleaning your leaves. So I've got what I like to call my clean and pest deterrent spray that I make using neem oil and peppermint oil. And I'll spray that on my plant, clean my leaves, and then not only keeps the leaves clean, but it does act as a deterrent. So you must make sure that you clean your plants. Take the time, commune with your plants, see how they're going. If you see if there's any pests, treat them immediately. Leca is a fabulous medium for propagation. If you have not propagated a plant in Leca clay bowls, I urge you to do so. It is fantastic. It propagates, the plants propagate so well. The roots come out so fantastically, and your plant is going to love you. I propagate my Hoyas, I propagate my philodendrons, I even germinate the corms from my alocasia directly in Leca clay bowls. And by using Leca, you're killing two birds with one stone. You are getting rid of one step. So if you're propagating your plant in water, for example, you'll propagate in water and then you'll need to either move it into soil, potting mix, or put it in Leca. But if you propagate in Leca, that's where it lives. That's where the plant lives. It will get roots and it will just live there. So you don't have to come back and do something else. You don't have to disturb the roots. Roots are fine. It's lovely. plants love propagating in leca. Some people like to actually put sphagnum moss on top of the leca when they're propagating to make sure that there's a lot of moisture in there. That's one way you can go, but propagating and leca, match made in heaven. I'm not going to tell you some advanced tips and tricks that I use to make sure that my plants thrive in leca. The first tool in my arsenal is a heat mat. I absolutely love heat mats. They are not expensive. They work really well to raise the temperature around the root ball of your plant and help those roots get nice and toasty and grow well. I love to use a heat mat when I am propagating my plants. When I first transition my plants from soil to leca, even when I'm doing the long method, I got my heat mat, I put my plant over there, and it is nice and toasty, and they grow really, really well, really, really quickly. So if you're wanting to ramp up the growth of your plants growing in leca, I highly recommend you grab yourself a heat mat. The next thing that I love to use is an air stone connected to an air pump. Yep, just the simple ones that you'd use in your aquarium. They are an absolute godsend. I use them when I am first transitioning my plants or when I've got a few special projects. So I will, if I'm doing the long method, for example, I will grab a little air stone and I will put it inside the nutrient solution. And what that does is it increases the oxygen levels in my nutrient solution. So remember how I said you need to refresh your nutrient solution every few weeks to make sure that you've got fresh oxygen in there? This just supercharges that nutrient solution and those roots just go absolutely ballistic. I kid you not. So when I'm doing a special project or when I've got a plant that I really, really love that I'm concerned about, I will put it in my long method, put it on a heat mat, and put my air stone in there. So it's bubbling away, it's heating away, and that plant is just in plant heaven. And within no time, those roots are going to be happy and I'll have my plant in leca and it's absolutely thriving. I've used an air stone when I was transitioning my fiddle leaf fig, my giant fiddle leaf fig from soil to leca. I had an air stone in there 24/7 for 3 months. I kid you not. And the roots that were formed were just to die for. So I cannot say enough about an air stone. I highly recommend you get one if you don't have one. Grab yourself a pH and TDS or EC conductivity meter. These are not things you absolutely need to have, but it's really important. They're going to help you as you're mixing up your nutrient solutions. You will then be able to mix up your nutrient solutions well. You know exactly what you're doing. You're taking the guesswork out of it. You're making sure your nutrient solution is within the right parameters of pH for your plants to absorb the nutrients that you're providing. It's the right concentrations of nutrients for the right plants. You're checking the conductivity. Not something you must have, but something I highly recommend that you get. Grow lights are something I highly recommend you get if you don't have. I use grow lights for a lot of my plants because I have a lot of plants and I don't have as much window real estate. So for plants that are not living directly in front of a window, a grow light is the only way to make sure they get the light requirements that they need. At the moment, I've got probably in excess of 8 grow lights in various places within my home. I know I've got a grow light that is shining on my bird of paradise plant at the moment, and I'm really hoping I can get that plant to flower. There's no way I can get that plant to flower while it's living inside the house without giving it the kind of light that it gets when it's outside. And the only way for me to do that is to use a grow light. So if you don't have adequate light in your home, I highly recommend you get a grow light. But to go with your grow light, I also recommend you get yourself a light meter, because a light meter is what's going to tell you exactly how much light your plant is getting. So even if you don't have a grow light, you might have your plant living in your home. You think that it's getting enough light, but when you actually use your grow light to test how much light it's getting, you'll find that it is not enough. So I highly recommend you get one. I have one. I've got one that was made by Daryl of the Houseplant Journal. I absolutely love it, and I use his parameters when I'm trying to figure out how much light my plant needs and where to place my grow light, how far or how far away from my plant or how close to my plant I need my grow light to be. My light meter is what helps me make those decisions. So I highly recommend you get one if you don't. A fan. I know having a fan is something that a lot of people wouldn't think of, but especially like in the summer months where it's really, really hot, you have zero air movement around. If you have a lot of plants, having a little bit of air that's moving around is a very helpful thing. So I've just got a few stand-up fans dotted around my house. I have them on a few times a day, depending on the season, and that just moves around the air around my plants, and I think they absolutely love it. You could also get a humidifier as well. Depending on the humidity levels in your home, you might want to ramp up that humidity. A humidifier is an easy, quick way of increasing the humidity around my home. Be careful about using humidifiers though, making sure that you're not growing mold in your home. So be very careful if you are going to go down the route of a humidifier. Some very common growing plants in Leca pitfalls. People checking on their roots. There is no need to check on your roots. If your plant is growing well, there's nothing wrong with it. You don't need to take your plant out of the pot and check on the roots. This is terrible. We want to keep our plants in a steady state. We do not want to be disturbing the roots unless absolutely necessary, because maybe your plant has got root rot or something. That's the only time you want to be taking your plant out of the pot and checking on the roots, as it were. Do not check on your roots. Another thing that you should not be doing is randomly repotting your plants. Just because you see roots coming out of the bottom of your reservoir does not mean that you need to repot your plants. So for example, I've got my Monstera Thai constellation here. I've got roots coming out from the bottom of my pot. That is not an indication for repotting. I see a lot of people repotting their plants because of this. No. Do not do that. You are causing damage to your plants. These roots here are used to growing in a hydro environment. You can see I'm tugging at it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that root. It's not weak at all. It's happy to live in that water. Leave it alone. The only time you need to be repotting your plant is if that plant is root bound. There is so many roots completely taking over the pot, that plant is starting to show signs of struggling. So one of the things I saw in my Calathea orbifolia was I didn't change the conditions. Everything was okay, but my plant started to get yellowing edges. And at that point, I thought this plant must be root bound, and indeed it was. And that is the only time you need to be repotting your plant, when it is root bound. Do not repot your plant just because you think there are so many roots that you can see. This is a common pitfall. Do not fall prey to this. Leave your plants alone. Let them thrive in their space. The most important thing I'm going to say today, plant people, is you need to find your people. You need to find a Leca community. You need to find people who are doing what you're doing. You cannot go and talk to people who grow their plants in potting mix or in soil and talk to them about growing plants in Leca clay bowls and the issues that you're having. Most of those people will probably tell you that you are insane and you are doing your plant a disservice. Do not listen to them. You need to find your people who are doing exactly what you're doing, who understand what you're going through, who understand what your plants are going through and what you need to do to help them thrive. It's so interesting how a lot of people out there are under the misconception that you cannot grow plants long-term using Leca clay bowls. This is just so untrue. All the plants you see around me are growing in Leca clay bowls. Some of them are really, really big, and all I did to get them to get to this point is understand what the plant needs, and I found myself a Leca community. I have a group of people that I have surrounded myself with who grow their plants in Leca, who understand the media, who help me when I need help, because I don't know everything. I haven't experienced everything there is to experience when I'm growing my plants in Leca. So when I have a problem, I can contact my good friend Nige. I'll say to him, what do I do here? Have you experienced this? And he'll say to me, yep, I've seen this kind of thing. This is what you need to do. I can contact my good friend Alison, the long-winded Leca lady, and she has a ton of experience growing plants in Leca, and she will send me in the right direction. I can contact Eve, the Leca addict, and they'll help me out. I contact a lot of people who are on my semi-hydroponics Facebook page. They contact me. They contact other people on that group, and we help each other. You can only get help from people who are doing the same thing that you're doing. If you go to other people, they're going to tell you all the reasons why what you're doing is not going to work. So find your people. Find the people who can support you, who can enhance your hobby, enhance your growth, and help you thrive. Of course, in everything that we do in life, there's a little bit of luck. You can do everything that I have said here. I can do everything that is known as best practice. I still have trouble with my plants. I am the first person to put my hand up and say, I have trouble growing alocasias in Leca. I'm the first person to put my hand up and say, I have trouble growing some calatheas in Leca, because sometimes you just need some luck on your side. That is all you need. Sometimes you've just got a dud plant. Sometimes there's just no explaining why things don't work out. But you know what's really important then? What's really important is to never give up, to keep trying. Resilience is what keeps the hobby alive. Resilience is what makes this fun. Resilience and wanting to try things for yourself, because you know what? I can sit here telling you all the things you need to do, but my house isn't your house. My conditions aren't your conditions. What I'm willing to do for my plants might not be what you're willing to do. So the only person who can find out what's best practice for you and your plants is yourself. Happy planting.